My topic of discussion will be, it sounds pretty involved because I tend to be a detailed writer. For those of you who might be in the webinar today that know me or have worked with me, but it will be painless, I promise, and hopefully interesting and a little bit entertaining at minimum. So my topic focuses within the tech consulting experience, though it can apply to different roles within the corporate environment as well, and I'll talk a little bit more about that soon enough. But we're going to talk about strategically building a backlog that's effective for short-term and long-term. So before I jump into that, formalities about me. I'm a senior solution architect at Synaptic Advisors. I have 7 years of Salesforce implementation and enhancement project experience across various industries. I have 5 years within the Salesforce partner consultancy space. I have 4 years of contributing to proprietary SaaS development projects, and that's also outside of Salesforce. I have an MBA, professional Scrum Master certified, and 3-time Salesforce certified. So I am officially a nerd, I think, at least a Salesforce nerd. Okay, which I own, I love it. All right, so key topics. I don't want to assume that everyone on the call is from the tech consultancy side or understands, the common jargon that's thrown around in Salesforce projects or tech projects. And so we're going to do a brief recap of those key terminology items, focusing on this item of themes, the untold story. And I think some of you, based on that title, can understand why I'm calling it that, but I'll clarify that soon enough. And then we're going to get into the strategic aspect of it, how you use relationship management to actually help build an effective backlog. We're going to talk a little bit about soft skill strategy. We're going to talk a little bit about technical skill strategy, and then we're going to circle back to Agile terminology, ending it with Moscow, which is a prioritization technique. And the end result of our conversation ideally would be an effective backlog. So I'll have a sample of that for you, and then we'll wrap up with questions. All right, so I've got to take my brain up a notch, make sure I don't get too detailed here. But Agile terminology. So I'm not going to get into Scrum Agile. Scrum Agile uses sprint planning. That's not really relevant at this point. It's far too detailed. But excluding Scrum and sprint planning, the most common terminology that you'll come across is Agile one, which for those of you who are not aware and maybe have been thrown into a tech development project and you're an unofficial product owner at a smaller group, or even at a corporate environment where they just didn't have someone who knew the business detailed enough and also had the technical side, and you happen to be the most detail-oriented person or employee, and you got the job of product owner for a short-term project or long-term project. You may have had to sit through a kickoff meeting where the Agile methodology was covered, because it's not uncommon across consultancies that we try to give you guys an understanding of how we do it a certain way and why we do it. And I'll touch on Agile when we get to soft skills again, but the key takeaway for you guys as far as Agile goes is the actual word Agile. So back in the day, there was this methodology referred to as waterfall. And waterfall wasn't really effective because it kind of made the assumption that the people who were asking for certain things to be built, telling us what they needed to be built in a system, it made the assumption that they really knew all the possibilities. And so oftentimes you'd have tech projects fail because it was taking what was said at an initial discovery meeting, taking the consultants away and out of the picture for X amount of time, having them build against what was said that one time, and this is a simple example, but essentially that, and then coming back and saying, here's your finished product. Agile is different in that it's a much more collaborative experience and allows you to adjust requirements as you work your way through and see the possibilities. As far as my experience goes, I'd say 95% of my projects at this point have been Agile. So, themes, initiatives. So within Agile, there's a certain way, now we're talking about the backlog overall, and there's a certain way to organize the work that needs to be done to get you the features and functionalities that you need in a system. And when we talk about a theme, from my perspective, and I'll emphasize this further soon enough, the theme is most important in being the translator between the two worlds of tech and business. It's generally a high-level organizational objective statement, so a goal statement of sorts, like, streamline revenue with more effective reporting, things like that. Initiatives are collections of epics. So initiatives are another point in the organization of work to be done that isn't used as frequently as far as projects I've seen. We'll typically take it from epic further down, and you guys will see a chart soon enough to clarify what I mean there. But initiative is basically another level down from the overall objective to organize the work. An epic is defined as a big chunk of work to meet that one common objective, aka theme, right? And so if your theme was streamline revenue with effective reporting, that one big chunk of work could be a data cleanse of all of your sales data. That's one major chunk of work that can mean 12 different things in the tech world. And so that's an example of one epic or feature, also used interchangeably. Not necessarily, this is a highly debated term within the tech space, and everyone has their own approach to Agile as far as I've seen, but that's the gist of it. And then there's the user story, which is really, it describes the feature and why you need that feature as a user of sorts. So as a Salesforce system user, I need to be able to X, Y, Z so that I can A, B, C, right? I'll show you some better examples of that soon enough. Moscow is a prioritization technique. So once you have all of your user stories, which essentially run your backlog, they are your backlog, you've got to decide, because you have a limited amount of time, what do you want in a phase 1 release? What do you want in a phase 2 release? Assuming your timeline is long enough, that's generally the advantage of applying the Moscow approach. So backlog is the wish list, right? And ideally it's prioritized, and we'll talk about how you guys will can potentially, depending on what role you play, just have your team members thinking in that way automatically soon. All right, an epic and agile methodology. So again, I've covered at a high level the actual definition, but just to give you some examples, an epic could be additional examples, I should say: registration, authorization, authentication, excuse me. Oh no, I said that right the first time. User profile, those are ideas of epics. Whereas a user story can be a little bit more specific: sign up with email, sign up with Facebook, log in with email. And I know my technical folks are seeing this and they're like, what, that's not right. These were simple examples that I found via Google search, but just for those of us who are not technical on the call, this is a starting point. Don't worry for the techies on the call. I've rectified this matter in the next slide. Okay, and I've made it interesting. So user stories, again, this is critical because this is the list that we're going to build this technological user experience off of, right? So sometimes we're just working with one department and they have all these different needs and they need their process automated and it's simple. But sometimes we're working across various departments to reach an overarching corporate objective, right? And so we call out the roles oftentimes within the user stories. And just to make things interesting, I said to myself, what if an epic had to do with offering privacy controls to Facebook users so that the world could stop complaining about it? This already happened, but it probably went something like this at Facebook. These user stories are exaggerated, but to give you a sense of how you have to think when you're creating user stories that are going to drive how your system works, your technical platform works. Let's say, as a sneaky teenager, I can select which Facebook users will see something I post so that I can exclude my parents from that list, right? As a forgetful person, I can edit the visibility settings on an existing post in case I forgot to hide it from my nosy relatives. And as a proud introvert, I can edit who can send me friend requests so that I don't have to experience the internal conflict associated with declining friend requests frequently. And that is a full-on introvert statement because there are so many words there. But to give you a sense, for those of you who are not technical, of how we're thinking about each feature that makes up privacy controls here, it gets very granular, but it all has to be accounted for. And so this concept of an effective backlog has more meaning, hopefully, at this point, in that you can't just say, I need to be able to track my client history, because that can mean so many things to us in the tech space. So we use epics and user stories to organize your thoughts. And as far as being strategic, or the purpose of my my session within this webinar, in order to get that information strategically, efficiently, and effectively from stakeholders, there's a bit of strategy that comes into play, and it involves certain soft skills and technical skills. But one item that for me has given me so much success that I don't see used frequently enough in the tech space, honestly, is the themes concept of Agile. So constantly bringing up the theme whenever we're building a backlog, and we're putting together our user stories, or what if we're already, the project is now underway and we're past the user story gathering phase, and questions and concerns come up. For me, in the projects where I have used themes to help my stakeholders make certain business decisions and reprioritize user stories, the themes have been critical in that, because again, the theme is the business statement, which is what everyone understands. And if any of you are familiar with Agile, oftentimes what's common is that you'll start with a more technical statement like add new video section, improve login page usability. But that doesn't really tell the business why you need to do these things, and people will forget given the amount of details that we're going through in these projects, right? So always using the themes and PowerPoints to call out, issues, and referencing the themes not only for the business side, but also for the tech side. I'll talk a little bit about that soon. To me, is critical and has been a big part of my success in projects. So overall, this is, as far as Agile goes, this is the hierarchy that I was talking about earlier, where you have the theme and epic, a story, for those of you who don't know it. And this is an example that shows the initiative item, just a visual aid to help you guys out. So going into the strategy aspect of it, I think that sometimes, because we're in the tech space, we're doing this every day, and we can become more controlling, I'd say, than we need to be in a discovery or in a collaborative session with clients, because we know so well what they might say, or what they're thinking they want to say, and we kind of drive it to a point where they're sharing ideas and just agreeing with us because we sounded the way we phrased it sounded better than the way they phrased it, but that may not be actually meeting their need. And so there has to be a certain soft skill acknowledgement when you're engaging in different refinement sessions, requirement gathering sessions. You have to keep your soft skills at the forefront of your mind, because as a consultant, you've seen so many processes and operational, process flows and things like that, that your mind is already drawing the picture before they can even, find the words to describe the issue. But at that point, you're also making assumptions, and that's dangerous. So your soft skills can be your point of quality assurance, your checkpoint to ensure that you're not just making assumptions based on things you've built in the past, but that you're actually building the user stories and the backlog that makes sense for this culture and this group's unique needs. And so that, as far as soft skill strategy goes, again, this can apply, to a various number of roles, not just within tech consulting, because tech consulting, if you think about the phrase, tech consulting can happen within a corporate environment with no consultants even in the picture, because you have internal customers and you have internal IT folks that you have to liaise between. And so it's a similar experience to that extent. And so this strategy and this approach can apply to a product manager, product owner, solution architect, business analyst, project manager, all these different roles that you guys are seeing out there within tech development efforts, this is all applicable, right? So the first, if you are the person that needs to gather those requirements and help build out those user stories, again, you don't want to make assumptions using your past experience. So the first thing you have to remember is that empathy matters, right? And so you have to empathize because your project participants are not implementing tech every day. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves of that. You have to speak their language and be aware of office culture. The common language you can use is the themes and initiatives and the business goals and even some of their internal jargon wherever it makes sense. And so the themes really facilitate everything from the start, I find. But another thing to keep in mind is the office culture. And I called that out because oftentimes we'll walk into a culture where we have a lot of people who are not used to voicing their opinion. And maybe their culture, their day-to-day ops, it's not needed, right? But and their managers or the executives don't necessarily require it. They don't encourage it because there's no need for it. But when you're building a tech project, there is a need for people to speak out. We have this phrase called SME, the subject matter expert, right? So you may not be a director, you may not be executive level, but you are the expert in all of the financial data that's being captured, across this client portfolio. Right. And so everything you have to say matters just as much because all of that data is going to impact what your executives can report off of. So it's very important that we encourage all project team participants and even those that maybe come in and out as subject matter experts to share and challenge each other's ideas. And we can do that in a way that's fun and not scary, simply by saying, okay, this is your idea, but what if this and what if that? And so once you give them permission to have that dialogue, there's no stopping them oftentimes, and it can get annoying because now they're coming to you with all their ideas. But it's important that they do that and that they be motivated and excited because that's just, one vote up for effective adoption once this thing goes live, right? If they're motivated and they're interested in it, then they're going to want to test it, they're going to want to use it, right? So that's what you want. Offer praise for effort and thought, even if a participant's idea doesn't make it to the backlog, right? Because we don't want to discourage them. And maybe their idea didn't make sense for that particular topic, but maybe they have more things. Maybe there's other topics where their ideas are really valid. And so you never want to really shut anyone down. And be an advisor. As these people are coming into these tech projects, it can be really intimidating. And so again, don't shoot down ideas. Briefly describe possible pros and cons of an outcome based on your experience. If they throw an idea at you that you're familiar with, and that will not only keep them encouraged, but also start teaching them to think in a certain way to give you only what is an effective user story, right? So you're training them to be specific in their user stories and to think about XYZ when they're putting their user stories together. And remind participants often to work together when appropriate. So sometimes there's cross-functional, cross-department collaboration that's needed. And that often comes into play when you're prioritizing features. That's the Moscow method that I'll talk about soon. But you absolutely do want to ensure that aligning that in prioritizing the user stories and really cleaning up that backlog, or AKA formerly known as grooming the backlog, it should always be prioritized to align with the best interest of the overarching theme in mind, the theme being the business goal or objective, right? We're doing this to reach a certain business goal, not just our lower level technical goals, and we have to remember that. That also helps train your stakeholders to think about value. And then at that point, they're really implementing their own strategy as they're helping you put this user story backlog into place, right? So now they're getting really sharp, and it's not just at the beginning in discovery or when you're narrowing down or signing off on requirements, it's all the way through. You want to remind them of the theme, the business objective, and make sure they're considering that when they're prioritizing features whenever it comes up, right? So that's really in dealing with the business side. But then there's the other side of the equation that's often forgotten in terms of backlog, building a backlog. And that is the technical teams, right? So as a solution architect, I call us hybrid consultants, because we have to have a functional skill set as well as a technical skill set. And so while we're talking to the business side and we're capable of doing that, we can also go over to the tech side and speak their language and see what they're thinking. But how often do we, right? And so I think initially checking with a system admin or developer, it may be valuable to understand the environment, etc. But also most importantly, is to check in with developers and the folks building out the system, and perhaps they're enhancing an existing system, to see what they've found that may impact your ability to deliver against a certain epic or initiative, right? Because now they know the org in a deeper sense, and they may be noticing things in terms of longer term maintenance that could cause issues, or they may notice a couple of formula fields that are calculating revenue that no one on the business side seemed to mention, right? They start to notice things, and so you always want to check in with them too. And then also, developers, they have ideas. So if they're connected to the business theme, the business objective, and I think putting that in Jira or Azure or any of those DevOps tools, making that theme visible, I feel that they come up with pretty innovative solutions, keeping that theme in mind. And so there's a benefit to reminding the technical side as well of those business objectives, right? Now, you as a perhaps technical resource, you keep your eyes open for data quality risks as project participants present their user stories, because oftentimes business side stakeholders, they know what they need, but they don't realize sometimes that they're asking for something that's going to create duplicate records of contacts, for example. That's a simple example. And so you want to keep your eye out for data quality items that perhaps may already exist, or make sure that you're not allowing user stories that will actually create data quality issues. So you also want to keep your eyes out for user experience if user stories change and if requirements change throughout the project, because it is an agile project. You want to test reporting against relevant user stories as early as possible and share samples with key stakeholders so they can see reports coming together. And now this is more specific to Salesforce, of course. And you want to build dashboard component samples early on. Because often users are not accustomed to having so many options to design smart dashboards around data. And so showing them dashboards early on often leads to team consideration of data quality, and also, having the ability to summarize data in a million different ways. It can also motivate for effective adoption once this thing goes live, right? So those are more of the technical items to consider, strategically speaking, when you are building a backlog. And so once you have your whole wish list in place, we have this concept that we refer to as Moscow. It's more of an acronym to help remember the must, should, could, and will not have, right? So this is more applicable and very helpful when we bring Scrum Agile into the picture, where we are building product backlog, but we're also allocating the user stories into different sprints, which is the overall timeline broken out into different pieces. And so it becomes more relevant there, but overall, now you've got this massive wish list. And if you reference your theme again, your business objective, identifying the must, should, could, and will not have items becomes much simpler. So those themes coming back into the picture and literally being visible to everyone involved, to me, is very important. And by the time you've gotten to this point, they should have no trouble prioritizing at all. And this is something that should come up, whenever you're adding user stories, et cetera, and or you're running out of time, let's say in a sprint, and you need to rework, et cetera, all that stuff. So Moscow prioritization of the backlog is super important. And the end result is a strategic and thoughtful backlog. And so you can see this is just an Excel sheet. It's an example, but We have the user story format here, which is as a administrator, member, visitor, I want to be able to add new categories, add new keywords, delete comments, block entries, so that I can monitor site visits, make content an easy group and search for. I don't know what this says exactly, but you've got your priorities here, your Moscow method here. Here you've got some sprint planning going and some statuses. So this is ultimately what your backlog should look like. It's often an Excel sheet for smaller groups, but it means so much, and it can continue growing even as you're in the project, when you start to realize, oh, okay, we've now got the simplest version of this functionality. We can add 2 or 3 more pieces of automation in phase 2. You come back to the backlog as the product owner and you add that and you keep track of it here. And really, it looks like a simple list of sorts, but there's quite a bit of strategy that goes into it, as you guys can see from everything I've just covered. So, questions?